on tight because I'm going to try to get us through the agenda. We'll start with welcomes and introductions. So, Melissa, do you want to start us off in the room? And if you're online, if you wouldn't mind just entering your introduction in the chat, please.
Good morning. My name is Melissa Steele, and I am the Deputy Fire Marshal of Wildfire Preparedness for the City of Bend.
I'm Greg Bryant, the Deschutes-Ferrer Woods Wildfire Coordinator.
Carol Flavel, Fire Ranch Homeowners Firewise Coordinator.
Kyle Collins, Deschutes County Planning.
Gary Marshall, Executive Director of Fire District 2.
Adam Lohman, Forest Conservation Specialist with the Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District.
Eddie Johnson, Firewise Committee of Westbrook Meadows Homeowners Association.
Morning, David Mormon, American Red Cross.
Good morning, Monty Damarel, Defensible Space Action Team for Newberry Regional Partnership.
Morning, everyone. Jenna Deibel, Central Oregon Extension Forester. Y'all are going to be hearing a lot more from me here in a second. So leave it to that.
And Lawrence Street Community Wildfire Protection Supervisor with the Natural Resources Program. And I'll just kind of lead right into some of our program updates. So as you all know, Fire Free ended at the end of June. And total cubic yards delivered to the transfer stations and not landfill ended up being 43,711 cubic yards. That's about 10,000 cubic yards over our 10-year average, which is exciting. The Spring Sweat Equity bin rental program also wrapped up on June 30th. So we supported 32 communities and provided the 30 cubic yard large dumpsters, anywhere between like 1 and 4 bins per community. And then communities could fill that up with fire fuel material. The disposal company would come pick it up and then re-deliver it. I know in talking with Gregory, as soon as a bin would get picked up and re-delivered, it would be full by the next day. And so we see that model be really successful with communities because folks can kind of work on their own schedule within the 2-month period to do fuel reduction on their property and fill those bins up that are right there in their community. We did our large community wildfire risk reduction grant that we had from the Oregon State Fire Marshal's office. That also ended on June 30th of this year. And so we had that funding for 3 years and we spent it nearly down to zero, which was very exciting. To get it down to zero, we did 2 additional community projects there at the end. And so we did a chipping project with Vandiver Acres where we worked with that community to select certain areas within their Firewise community for folks to stage material. And then we had a chipper or a contractor come through with a chipper and chip all of that material. They're one of our newest Firewise communities, so it's exciting to kind of bring them into the fold and get a project on the ground for them. And then we did a shaded fuel break for the Oregon Water Wonderland 2 Sanitary District. So they own about 500 acres in the Three Rivers area, and they are completely surrounded by private properties and communities. So we put a shaded fuel break in there because there has been a history of fire on that piece of property. And so I think the shaded fuel break was only 50 feet wide, but it significantly increases access on the backside of properties for wildland firefighters or responders to get in through the back of the property versus going through private properties. Coming up, we've got the 2 grant programs that will be available this fall. So we have our fall fuel reduction grant, which everyone in here should be relatively familiar with. So this is a smaller grant opportunity. Last fall, we were able to support 53 communities with awards ranging from $1,600 all the way up to $4,600. And this is a sweat equity model. For communities to, pitch in some of their volunteer time, and we match them with an award to help them do that work. And this fall, we'll also have our BLM Good Neighbor Authority funds, and we'll be standing that program up. And this will be a larger grant opportunity for communities or partnering organizations that own land, such as Deschutes Land Trust. They've put in for these funds before as a landowner that's adjacent to private properties. These grants will be up to $25,000 for communities or landowners to apply in and do larger scale fuels mitigation or forest restoration projects. It will operate similarly to the fall fuel reduction grant, where it has to be a community benefit. It can't just be on one singular private property that's not benefiting adjacent community members. So that application will likely be available in the month of September, and then we'll hopefully award in October. And that will, of course, be on our natural resources webpage. So if you Google Deschutes County Natural Resources, it should be the first link that comes up. The website, if you have not been on it in a couple of months, it might look a little different. We no longer have our grant opportunity tab. There's a blue strip on the left-hand side, and all of our grants are listed under that. And so if you're not familiar with the page, I would encourage you to go take a look at it before it actually comes time to apply for one of these grants. And then the last thing is we've been working with the Wildfire Research Center based out of Colorado, and they have done projects all over the nation. They do social surveys, and they come with funding, and they're always looking for areas that are high wildfire risk. So we've partnered with them, and we're going to be doing just under 2,300 surveys in the Lapine area to collect data on what are people's perception of wildfire, what do you believe your risk is, have you done mitigation practices on your property. It's a pretty lengthy survey. It's actually 16 pages long. But yeah, their average, they've done, I think, like close to 50 projects all around the country and have been very successful. I think their average return is like 40%. So if we get a 40% return on that, I think that'll be great information to have as we move forward with implementing a lot of the work that we have through the funding from the Community Wildfire Defense Grant that we're going to be implementing down there. So we're hoping that information can kind of drive some of the workshops, the education and outreach that we do, and also polling folks on just their overall perception. It'll hopefully give us some areas to focus in on. So that's going to be a short project. We've already kind of stepped into the planning arena with the Wildfire Research Center, and the project should be totally complete by November. So we're in the process right now of crafting the first initial letter to go out to folks that are going to be receiving this survey, just to give them a heads up of, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's the information we're hoping to collect. Please fill this 16-page survey out. We know it's long, but it's very valuable. And then last but not least, we have our kickoff meeting this Friday for the community wildfire protection plans. We received funding from FEMA, which passed funding down through Oregon Emergency Management and then onto us. We're going to be combining our 7 CWPPs into one, which will certainly lighten the administrative load of needing to update each of those every 5 years. They're all on different schedules, which can be a pretty big lift for our program. So we're hoping with that being one plan, we can update it all at the same time. We are going to keep the different areas separate within the document in some ways, like each area will have their own action plan, et cetera. And we're going to have folks from all over the county involved in the curation of this one plan. So the information is not lost in the combination of those. So that is the end of my report. And if you have questions on any of that, please feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. I know that's a lot of information, but we're also trying to keep everything up to date on our webpage as well, and hoping to create that and make it into more of a usable resource for folks to find information. And with that, I will pass it over to you, Jenna.
Okay.
Yeah.
Quick question. Yeah, the action plan for each one of the CWPPs is important, but is it going to be built into the change to where community members can meet to give their input, towards having the action plan? Because all of Deschutes County is a large footprint.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're in the process right now. So we're actually working with the Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council to help put this plan take the 7 and put it all into one. And they're a contractor that's worked on CWPPs in the past. They also help with the Sheriff's Department doing the hazard mitigation plan. So they're very familiar with these changing processes and creating a usable document and a living document like that. And so right now I know Corinne is in the process of compiling that list. Historically, we've had 7 different groups all around the county where when it's time to update one, we have the one that needs to be updated and we have a list of folks that are associated with that. And we try to get a really good representation from private property owner all the way up to our federal agency partners and everything in between. So we're going to be taking each one of those lists and making a giant list and pulling that list and saying, would you like to be involved in this process of creating one singular plan? And then, of course, there's always going to be public comment on the backside for folks that might not want to attend all of those meetings, but do want to give their input. We'll, of course, have the window for that as well.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Absolutely. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. So, like I said before, name is Jenna Deibel. I'm the Extension Forester for OSU in Central Oregon. My full title, however, is your Central Oregon Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Agent / Assistant Professor of Practice, serving Crook, Deschutes, Jefferson counties, and the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. They gave me the longest job title.
Is there an acronym to that?
Just a garble, that's what that is. And forgive the corniness of my title slide there. I was trying to figure out a title for virtually 2 presentations. So today we're going to be giving an overview on what my local extension programming has been. I gave a presentation here about 2 years ago, probably only like 2 months into my job, and I had no idea what the heck I was going to do. And so I know a lot more about the educational needs of our community and have been doing a lot of work in it, namely around the juniper side of things. And so I'll give an abbreviated version of one of my juniper ecology and management talks. So first on a brief introduction to extension forestry, 3 laws created extension. Morrill Act established land grant institutions. Hatch Act established experiment stations, and the Smith-Lever Act established the extension offices as we know them today. The intent of extension service is that these land grant institutions are receiving federal tax dollars to do the groundbreaking forestry and agricultural research that we do. And for receiving that money, we need to give the taxpayers back what they're paying for. And that's what extension is. We are meant to be the interface between the land grant institutions and the public, serving them from their tax dollars. The Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Program, we always call it FNR, was established in the 60s to support the growing timber industry. But today, of course, we have much more diverse audiences beyond industry. We have lots of types of jobs under the FNR extension world. We've got program leads, we've got statewide specialists. Our forestry agents are county-based, and they are essentially your informal educational resource on all things forestry and natural resources. I'm a professional scientific communicator is essentially what I am. Going into more specific responsibilities, first and foremost, I am here for local landowner support. So I'm here for the one-on-one phone calls from folks who say, I've got such and such acres and I've got this problem. My tree is dying. What do I do? And I am there to give folks the information they need. Essentially, what I like to say is that my job is not to tell people what to do. My job is to give people the tools they need to empower themselves to do the actions they already wanted to do. So I am here to support folks in whatever endeavor they have. I don't have an agenda with it other than making sure that folks are safe and healthy and happy with the land that they manage. In a general sense, I'm a facilitator of forestry natural resource outreach programs. That's the scientific communication side of things. I also serve as a neutral educational advisor on certain committees, on collaboratives, in Warm Springs up on essentially their version of the NEPA process. But also, as it pertains to juniper things, I've also been called to public meetings around high tension conversations about juniper as a third party neutral subject matter expert. I'm a project partner for agencies, tribes, and landowners. You got a grant and a project and it has some sort of outreach component to me or in it, you can reach out to me and see if there's a way for extension to collaborate. A connector of natural resource management partners. I like to call myself a bringer togetherer. And so I'm essentially, I'm not involved in every project that's going on in Central Oregon, but I at least got my fingers in each of the pots and know kind of what's going on. And I know who the players are. And so I'm like the operator. I'm a good person to call. If you're like, I want to talk to someone about this, but I don't know who to talk to, reach out to me and I can probably refer you to who they are. And then there's a research component of my PD. Haven't delved too much into it, but any research that I do will be based on the local educational needs and priorities of our local community. It's not like I say, I want to learn more about newts, so I'm going to do research on newts. If that's not important or vital information for my local landowners here, it's not really worth my time. Here is the Central Oregon region. Again, I cover the Tri-County area plus Warm Springs. I'm the one extension forester with a tribal appointment. And I share the region with, there's only one other person in FNR extension out here. It's Ariel Cowan on the Zoom, our regional fire specialist. She covers the same region as I do and also Klamath and Lake counties. And you have an extension forester down in Klamath and Lake. His name is Kadani Gade. He's wonderful. Okay, so hey, Dean, you know where that is?
Oh, yeah.
That's his house. That's the back of Dean's head right there. So when I first started in this job, there hadn't really been an extension forestry program at Hart for really several years. And so when I came in and I said to my bosses, what do I do? They said, make something. We trust you. So I spent my first essentially 6 to 9 months just absorbing and meeting people and learning the ecological context and what the educational priorities of our community are. This is an ongoing, ever-going process. I am constantly reassessing what the educational priorities are. Something that might have been a priority for me last year might have to go onto the back burner because something else is more important today. So this list is not the same as it was 1 year ago. But in a sense, my 4 main pillars of programming are around juniper ecology and management, forest health, just your basic introductory forest ecology for folks, and tribal forestry and natural resources. Under the asterisks are various official FNR programs that are delivered across the state that you could also see being delivered here by me in collaboration with some of our colleagues. Okay, so let's go into each of those themes in a little more detail. First and foremost is Western juniper. This wasn't even anywhere on my list last year. And now it's my number one, probably like 50% of my programming right now is around juniper ecology and management. My first several months or my first year or so of working here, I've been, advertising myself and saying, I can teach about this. I can teach about that. What about this? I can come and talk to you about this. This is the first topic where people are inviting me to come out to their places and talk about juniper. And so it seems that I've come across a niche that hadn't been filled. And I'm wholeheartedly ready to step into it. If there isn't, we've got lots of players. How do I say this? Over here in Central Oregon, we have so many players in natural resource management, and we got a whole heck of a lot of people who know a lot about our pure ponderosa stands, our South County forest types, and how ecology works in those areas. And there's plenty of great outreach materials about those ecosystems out here. That doesn't really exist for Western juniper, and any and all resources about it are either wildly biased in one direction or the other, or they're locked away in 90 plus pages of data and figures and is not really accessible for folks. So that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to give folks any information they need about ecology, biology, why it's everywhere, water relationships with juniper, what we know and don't know, products, practical management strategies, et cetera, et cetera. We'll go into this in my presentation later. Forest health, I'm a why is my tree dying person in Central Oregon. So long as it's native trees or pine trees at this point, even the ornamentals. If you've got a tree that's dying, a stand that's not looking so hot, feel free to call me out. I can do a stand assessment. I also teach what we call pesting investigator workshop, which is essentially teaching folks how to do a stand assessment of their own forest so that they can figure out who the culprit is no matter what's going on. Land management basics. I'm here as your local naturalist and ecologist, here to talk about our basics of forest ecology, fire ecology. I teach a class on digital mapping tools. I do tree identification, both classes and also walks. Let's see. Oh, in the photo down there with the Christmas tree and the wreath, those are, the tree I cut down from the Deschutes, and it was a fir tree that was growing right next to an old growth ponderosa. And there's a sign underneath that wreath that has a picture of that. And it's basically an outreach piece that says, do your part to save the forest by getting your own Christmas tree. And so just kind of like the random things that come across. And then tribal forestry and natural resources. This is probably about where the other virtually 50% of my programming is these days. I have this as a separate pillar, not because those other three categories of programming don't apply to Warm Springs, but I wanted to make sure that my work, when I'm working up there, I am not siloed into some sort of educational topic. I'm really there to be an extra set of hands and be helpful in whatever that means. And so in general, doing a lot of work related to workforce capacity building and land reconnection. So I'm basically running an internship program for the Branch of Natural Resources this summer. There's the kids eeling 2 weeks ago down in the bottom left over at Shearers. And on the bottom right was when I was taking them out to their conservation areas in John Day. Also working with the tribal youth crew that does trail work, creates defensible space and whatnot with Thomas Stokely. And I also put on a wreath class up there. And then currently I am helping organize a huckleberry habitat management workshop for the tribes this coming September. But again, like that little tree that's over outside the education building up there, one of the chair of the Culture and Heritage Committee at the time had some really gnarly looking trees that were so root bound in their casings, and she wanted me to plant them in front of the building. That's what I'm here for. She had Thomas Stokely dig cedar roots for her when he was in my job, so I think this was a little bit easier than that. And then, where am I? What year is it? This is the random aspect of my job. On a given day, I could be doing stand density research. I could be digging for roots. I could be teaching little girls how to use a crosscut saw. I could be doing programming for our arborist community in collaboration with Amy Jo Detweiler, our horticulture expert. I could be aging a giant cookie from Drake's Park donated by Ben Parks and Rec with Ari, or doing an ACI demo down in South County. It's sort of a hodgepodge, and wherever I can fit and be helpful, that's where I will be. But at the end of the day, I'm just thinking and talking about trees at every scale, at every angle, from cells to landscapes. Whether I'm on the clock or not, whether I want to or not, the trees are everywhere. And when I look at them, I think about them. And so I'm here as your local natural resources educational resource. And now let's go into the thing that I talk about a lot these days, juniper. So I'm going to go over some basic ecology and biology, the factors of juniper expansion, some characteristics to look for old growth identification, the juniper and water relationship, what we do and don't know, what we are and aren't recommending, and what I term vibes-based management. So setting the scene, Western juniper occupies over 6 million acres across the Eastern Oregon landscape. They can be found virtually in any landscape, from 1,000 foot or 600 feet elevation all the way up to 7,000 feet elevation, but they'll usually be in that 3,000 to 5,000 foot range. They can be found in places with as little as 7 inches of annual precip all the way up to 30 inches of annual precip. Again, they usually stay in that 10 to 15 inch zone, and they can also be found in virtually any soil type. They're going to be in the clays, they're going to be in the loams, they're going to be in the sands, but generally they're going for the dry and cold stuff. And depending on where you are in Eastern Oregon, there can be anywhere between 5 to 10 times the amount of junipers that there were historically pre-settlement. So to get into why that is, we first have to know a few things about its ecology and biology. So historically, they were found only on rim rocks and outcrops and places with low productivity soils, essentially places where fire couldn't reach them. Seed is spread by gravity, water runoff, but primarily our Western juniper seeds are spread by animals. See, when a juniper seed drops from the tree onto the ground, things take a while to decompose out here. So it can take about 2 to 3 years for that casing to decompose enough so that seed is ready to germinate. A bird eats that seed, goes through the digestive tract, gets pooped out, it's ready for germination immediately. And so we see most of our juniper, or a good chunk of our junipers are being spread by animals, which leads to a second relationship related to shrub cover. On average, approximately 1/3 of all Western junipers, specifically Western junipers, establish under some sort of shrub cover. It's pretty highly variable from like 15% to 57%. The lower productivity soils, the more junipers you're going to see establishing under shrubs. The more productive the soil, the less likely you're going to be seeing junipers establishing under cover because they don't really need it as much. But there's a juniper that's establishing underneath some sagebrush. They utilize the brush as protection from exposure. It sort of creates a little microclimate underneath it. It utilizes the resources that the sagebrush is taking, or bitterbrush is taking in for itself. And then eventually, as you can see in that bottom right photo, it will continue growing up, pushing out that sagebush and taking its place. It's a very parasitic relationship. And so we see this really strong relationship between birds eating seeds and establishment of junipers under some sort of shrub cover. They also have a super well-developed root system. This is a photo that a friend took up in Warm Springs. She'd been off on maternity leave for several months and came back to a project site and was like, the cliff's gone. And so she walked up there, and sure enough, this juniper, probably through freeze-thaw effect, had created cracking in the rock, but it exposed the awesome root system that we have going on here. And this one has a pretty decent taproot, but check out that lateral root that's going off to the side there. Yeah, that is, our lateral roots for junipers can extend up to like 2 to 3 times the drip line of the juniper tree. And about 65% of the root mass of junipers is going to be those lateral roots. In most soil types, Western juniper will burn off or not utilize their taproot as much as they do their lateral roots. If it's a really deep soil profile and high productivity soils, they will probably still maintain their taproot. But a lot of our junipers, they're mainly using those lateral roots. And again, slow growing, long lived. Our oldest living juniper that we know of is over 1,600 years old, and it lives on Horse Ridge, east of Bend. So, juniper expansion, we know it happened. These are photos taken in the John Day soil province specifically, and this will be important in the next slide here, but it shows how rapidly juniper expansion happened in relatively a short time frame. Here's a follow-up photo of the Keystone Ranch, what it looks like in 2012. And then in 2024, they've done some thinning work. There was a fire in that in that big open space there, but you can still see the general thickening up that's happened over time. And same thing with that photo on the left side there. And this is a photo that my partner actually took for me up at the old Prineville grade. He has access to historic photos at the museum, and so he managed to find the exact spot where this photo from 1900 was taken and overlaid them on top of each other, and it really shows how much growth we've seen as of late. So our stages of woodland succession, I lied about it being on the next slide. I think it's on the next one. But stages of juniper woodland succession, we break them up into 3 phases. Our phase 1, the trees are present, but our shrubs and herbs are still the dominant ecological component that's dominating ecological processes. Phase 2, our trees are co-dominant with the shrubs and herbs. In phase 3, trees are the dominant vegetation. So you notice that I have 2 photos that look pretty different for phase 3. That is because there's different soil profile underneath them. Top photo is a shallow soil profile, and so those junipers are primarily maintaining lateral roots in this area, and so there isn't any more resources for the grasses to utilize. On the bottom left there is a deep soil profile. So those trees have likely maintained their taproot into the mollisol soils, which means that there's still resources available for the bunchgrass population in there. So pretty highly variable. And so with that variability of phase 3, and also it can be kind of tough to see, like, is this a late phase 2? Is it phase 3? And knowing which phase you're in has really big implications for knowing what the proper management action is going to be for your intended goal. We've got a lot of different metrics that we use to determine which phase of woodland succession you're at. But most generally, in your phase 2, your berries are going to be present. It's actually going to be at its maximum in phase 2. And by phase 3, the trees can sense that there's not enough room for babies, and so they're not going to waste their time and energy on making reproductive structures. And so when I collect samples for my classes of young juvenile junipers, if I walk into a stand and I see that there's no berries around, I just walk out because I know that there's not going to be any young junipers in there.
Soil do you have to the left versus with the deep?
The deep is a mollisol. Mollisol, sorry.
I'm gonna take some tea in a minute because I'm getting to past what I need to do. So I'm just gonna come do that. This is hard, but important. Moving the bark dust over there because of leftover roots from
If you're online, make sure you're muted, please.
Sounds like Kathy Smith.
Yeah. So I'm making a dent. These are going to be vacuumed out because they're filled with bark.
No, we can. I'll try to.
So, but I thought I could do it by hand.
Kathy.
I'll just get when you're not working there,
Yeah.
I'll get the shop vac and
If you're online, please make sure you're muted, please. Kristen and Scott Collins.
Except that's why I'm up at 8:30 instead of.
There we go. There we go.
Okay. Well, with that little intermission. Soils. Mollisols in the bottom left there, that's going to be our deeper, more loamy profile. The top right is likely a more sandy profile. But the main difference there is the shallowness or deepness of the profile, less than the soil type itself. So, our causes of Western juniper expansion. As with everything in natural resources, it's never just one thing. And in this case, it was a 1, 2, 3 punch of both climatic conditions and unfortunate natural resource management decisions that our predecessors made. So, first and foremost, climate. back in the mid 1800s, we saw a period of milder temperatures and more precipitation out here, meaning we didn't have as wild of temperature swings as we do in the high desert, and there was more rain, and that essentially primed the landscape to grow everything. And so we do have evidence of some juniper expansion pre-settlement. However, it's not nearly to the same exponential degree that we saw after white people got here. So when we got here, and I say we because my family was grazing over on the Malheur River during this time, livestock grazing. We grazed this land hard. We did season-long grazing, hundreds of head of cattle and sheep. And what this did was it decimated the herbaceous population, the grass population. And in a place like this, in this bottom photo, there's no juniper trees. So what we would have seen first was shrub expansion. So with that shrub expansion, what did we learn about shrubs and their relationship with juniper establishment? That's where they like to be. So essentially, we created a whole bunch of germination grounds for the junipers during that time. And at the same time, we artificially removed fire from the landscape that would have culled those young junipers before they had a chance to establish into woodland succession phase. So again, not just a one thing. We had ideal climatic conditions for anything to grow, so it primed the landscape. We created a whole bunch of germination grounds for them by decimating the herbaceous population, and we removed fire from the landscape, which would have culled, again, those young junipers before woodland succession started. So in combination, this is what led to the juniper expansion that we see across our landscape today. Old growth ID. So, okay. So old growth juniper does not grow the same across the landscape. And actually within very short distances, it did not grow the same across our landscape. And we can basically break it up into three main areas based on soil types. Go figure. So our red star here is us over here in Bend. First, we've got our sedimentary soils over in the John Day soil province. Junipers over here are almost entirely going to be what we call topographically confined to rocky outcroppings, rim rocks, places that fire couldn't reach them. And less than 5% of the junipers that you're going to see up here are considered old growth. Moving down into the Great Basin in our igneous soils, these guys are also going to be pretty widely spaced and mainly topographically confined like the sedimentary soils. But in places with heavy clay soils, you might see some woodland structure of old growth junipers on the landscape. But in this area, less than 10% of all junipers that you're going to see are going to be considered old growth. And now let's move into the Mazama complex, into the Aeolian soils, our pumice and ash. This is where the old growth groves are. Because soils were non-productive enough that fire could not carry through that landscape as readily. And I like to actually break this up in half from north-south. And down south and east of Bend, I call this old growth. So these are going to be our 1,000-plus-year-old persistent groves. This is where our 1,600-year-old juniper tree is. These are going to be our old growth. Now we move up to the Bend-Redmond Sisters Triangle. This is an area that I call new old growth, or our sub-1,000-year-old juniper groves. This is the area that I live in, and I got lots of old growth on the property that I live on, but they're not nearly as old as the guys that are east of Bend, but they're several hundred years old for sure, definitely old growth. And so the pattern that we see up here, for instance, if I'm walking down from Cascade View on the west side of Klein Buttes, walking down, you'll walk through a juniper old growth woodland that's a pretty accurate historic structure and spacing, probably about 600, 700-year-old trees. Walk through that into a more open area with younger trees, but you can see evidence of stand replacing fire in the landscape because things don't decompose. It's probably centuries old. Walk through that into another historic old growth grove. And so what we saw up here was more of a mixed severity, intermittent stand replacement across the landscape, but still non-productive enough to maintain old growth stand form for at least several hundred years at a time. But in general, over 10% of all the junipers you're going to see in this area are considered old growth. And this is why when I hear people from, I used to live in Prineville for many years, hear people say, in Prineville, oh, you got to cut all those junipers down. There's way too many of them. And the people of Bend are like, no, but they're so pretty and they're so great that they need to stay. And I say, you're both correct. You're both right. This isn't a conflict. And this is why, because over such a short distance, we see a wildly different historic structure of our old growth juniper. And this is just a really brief, clearly graphic design is my passion here. But if you can't tell, on the right here, those are a rim rock and a rock outcropping. And so on the left here would be our more woodland style of 5 trees per acre, versus on the right is more so what you might have seen in the igneous or sedimentary soils of topographic confinement. And you could have also seen like an entire acre with no trees, and then, one rocky outcropping where there's an acre of like several trees. So pretty variable and is an average across the whole landscape. Okay. Very briefly, our different types of trees, of age classes in our trees. We've got our juvenile form of juniper. This is, they are maximizing their carbon intake at this point in their lives, which is why their stomata are open and why they're really spiky. So when they're open and spiky like that, you know that they're working really hard on their taproot. And that's why if you're walking around your property with your bare hands, don't go trying to yoink out small junipers. One, that taproot is there and you're not going to be able to yoink it out, and you're going to have a whole bunch of nasty cuts on your hand. Now, our post-settlement versus old growth trees. I don't think folks online are really going to be able to see this, but in general, our post-settlement trees look like this. Our old growth trees look like that. So, and that's not very far off for how we determine old growth out here, because, traditionally for old growth, IDing old growth trees, we'll use an increment borer to core a tree and count the rings. Now, because old growth junipers like that one, this is the oldest one that we know of, over 1,600 years old, they're so warped and it's a really hard wood and they're often rotten on the inside that many a forester has lost an increment borer trying to core an old growth juniper. So when they're actually aging them in research, such as what they did for the oldest one, is they'll do a punch cut. So they'll get a chainsaw, tip in first and go, meh, 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 meh. And they'll cut out a whole block of juniper and they will count the rings from that. As long as you don't subject the juniper to several of those, they'll be fine. But if you're just a property owner and you want to know if you've got old growth, but you don't want to do punch cuts on every tree on your property, that's not, so instead, we generally identify old growth based on how weird it looks or old growth characteristics. And we've got 3 that we look out for. But first, before we go into that, careful, looks can be deceiving. So these are 2 trees that are in Idaho in a similar area, similar elevation. The tree on the left here is about 8 inches diameter, 6 feet tall. Tree on the right is like 40 inches diameter, 35 feet tall. Tree on the right is about 350 years old. Tree on the left is over 600 years old. Any ideas in the room about why that is? Why do they look so different? They're in the same place, basically. Water, close. Yeah.
It's growing out of the rocks.
It's growing on a rock. It's tough to grow on a rock. You end up looking all stunted and dwarfy like this guy. And even in my own property up in the Redmond area, it's often my oldest trees are not the tallest ones that are in my stand. And so whereas for other tree species, we're looking at size and height to help determine old growth, not helpful for juniper. So instead, we're going to be looking at old growth characteristics. First is canopy form. This is essentially the weirdness factor of junipers. So sparse canopies, you might have some spiky tops from cavitation. Spreading sparse canopies, the weirder it looks, the older it probably is. Oh, and this is why you might have some weird shape. Have you guys ever seen like a darn right shrubby looking juniper? Like it's all multi-stem and whatever. That's probably a factor of it establishing under a bush. So it's really hard to tone that photo, but that's a juniper that a stick from the sage has fallen onto and tipped it over. And so now all of those lateral branches are becoming the new leaders for it. And so being under a shrub can give you some weird shapes. This is one way that we get our weird shape in our canopies. This is actually what we hypothesize is the main reason why our junipers go from this form to this form. And essentially what cavitation is an embolism. It's an air bubble that's introduced into the water transport system of the tree, and everything above that dies. And it happens out here pretty frequently due to what I call our weather whiplash season between late winter and early spring. So the random March day that's 75 degrees and then it snows 2 days later, that's what causes cavitation. Because on that 75-degree day in March, our junipers are transpiring all year long. So the sun comes out, it's all happy, it's evapotranspirating all over the place, it's losing its water resources, having a great time. Okay, I need to replenish my water resources here so I can keep on making food, but oh no, soil's still frozen. And so what that leads to, I liken it to trying to suck on a straw with one end covered or trying to drink out of a really cold, thick milkshake fast. Essentially, you start creating a whole bunch of negative pressure on that xylem transport, and eventually enough pressure happens that it collapses in on itself, air bubble enters in, embolism occurs. And when that happens, you can kind of see the top right photo. That's a tree that cavitated that year. You can tell because the foliage is still on it. The one on the left is going to be one that only cavitated a few years ago. And on the bottom there, you can start to see the little spiky top up there, but you can start to see some of those branches coming up around it and starting to create a more rounded top. And here are just some more examples of cavitation and what that can look like in our trees. I see it all over the place. You'll often see pockets of cavitation, especially with younger junipers like that, because it's all pretty climatically influenced. Here's a juniper over in the Badlands, looking like a sphere, walking around it. You can see that it was cavitated most of the way down, and so it was only its lower branches that were able to persist and survive, making it look downright spherical. Next is our wolf lichen. That's our chartreuse, bright yellow-green lichen that we see, not just on our junipers, but if you see this in tandem with weird canopy shape and the other characteristic we're about to talk about, probably going to be old growth. And bark texture. So you could have a tree that is both weird looking and has wolf lichen and is not old growth. So for an example of this, in those instances, you're going to be looking at bark texture for your answer. And so in this instance, this is a few trees that are west of Klein Buttes in the same spot, virtually the same height, similar structure. They're all at least 100 years age difference from each other. And I can tell that based on the bark texture. So looking at this right guy, his bark is gray. And if I were to place my hand on that trunk, it would feel virtually flat underhand there. Moving over to our left tree here, we start to get a slightly more cinnamon color and more furrowed bark. And then our back tree here, we've got even deeper cinnamon color, deeper furrows. I could like grab onto one of those furrows. And then you can also see that guy has a little bit of wolf lichen there on his branch too. And so that's probably approaching like 300 years old, still new old growth. But again, when structure is looking virtually the same, the difference in bark texture is what's going to give it away. Lots of reasons to cut juniper. There's also just as many reasons not to cut juniper, and they're perfectly valid. You might want privacy. It might be the only damn tree you can grow. And so there's not, well, there are wrong answers, but for the most part, virtually all people's goals when it comes to juniper are totally valid. And so I'm here to help folks figure out the management strategies to, again, accomplish those goals they already want to make. So before going in, so you'll probably notice I didn't put water resources, water yield availability on here. So this is going to be my most number heavy slide. I'm going to really try to breeze through this. We know that junipers intercept a lot of water. Lighter rain, they're going to intercept more than a deluge. It's virtually a 1-to-1 ratio of rainfall to interception rate. So for example, if you have 50% canopy cover, 2 inches of rainfall, your ground is effectively going to have 1 inch of precip on it. Soil infiltration, the more junipers you have, the less overland resistance we have. And so you can imagine if you're water going down a hill slope and you hit a bunch grass, in that moment that you have to slow down and move around that bunch grass, that allows time for the soil or for the water to infiltrate into the soil. If it doesn't have those resistance blocks along the way, water's just going to run right off. And we see basically 2 times the amount of runoff on bare juniper woodlands versus in places where we have healthy bunchgrass systems. So soil water availability. This is our how much water does juniper drink per day. On average, it's going to be anywhere between 3 and 38 gallons. That 38 gallons is like for 3 weeks during the wettest June of your life. That's at peak productivity time. So our junipers are not drinking 38 gallons of water a day, every day, all year round. It's only for a short period of time during peak circumstances. They're opportunistic, just like the rest of us. But on average, they're going to be consuming about 13 gallons per day during peak growing season again. And so we do see results again, because they primarily have those lateral roots. We do see responses, positive responses of vegetation, shrubs, grasses after the removal of juniper in some areas. Now, when it comes to the downstream impacts, that's where we're a little more uncertain when it comes to small land parcels specifically. So we've done a lot of research over at the Camp Creek Paired Watershed Study OSU has on hydrologic responses to juniper cutting at the Camp Creek Paired Watershed Study. For those who aren't familiar, they cut junipers in one watershed, didn't cut them in the watershed next door, and have been taking data for 20 plus years of that, and they had 11 years of pre-treatment data there. And the results of that are super promising. They are showing deep water hydrologic impacts of removing juniper, but they're removing juniper at scale. And so when it comes to our, Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District or the Bureau of Land Management or large landowners who are trying to do, tens and hundreds of acres of juniper removal, they are more likely they're probably going to see some sort of hydrologic impact. However, when it comes to our small landowners, right now, we are saying that removing juniper just to improve water yield isn't recommended as the primary management goal for small properties. Because we don't have, I don't have the metrics to go up to you, Monty, and say, look for X, Y, and Z conditions. And if you cut junipers here, a spring's gonna come up. You're going to improve your water table. We can't predict that. And so if you're a small landowner and you're removing juniper for downstream impacts primarily, it's more or less a crapshoot, to be quite frank. I could be coming back to you in 5 years and be like, we know the metrics, we know what to look for. But at this point, what we're recommending for folks, because we don't want people to be disappointed. We want people to accomplish the goals that they have. And so if you are to cut juniper for any of those other reasons that we had listed there, soil water availability, products, wildlife habitat, hazardous fuels mitigation, you will likely, or you might have some sort of hydrologic impact, downstream impact from that. And so instead of recommending to folks like, go and make a crapshoot and see if you can improve your well water out there, and then, it probably doesn't happen, you're disappointed. Having your primary goal be something that is achievable, hazardous fuels reduction, wildlife habitat, products, improving your bunch grass population, you have that benefit. And you might also have this water benefit, this deep water downstream impact benefit as well. Did that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay. So yeah, not trying to invalidate all the awesome work that's going on in Crook County, for instance, related to hydrologic yield and their juniper removal. They're working at hundreds of thousands of acres, so it makes sense for them. But again, small parcels, not as recommended at this time.
How do you define small?
I'd say less than 40 acres. Yeah. All right. So vibes-based juniper management. So because juniper has historically hasn't had commercial value, we don't have the same silvicultural metrics and models as we do for literally every other tree species. And so because of that, we do this, what I call vibes-based juniper management, which is essentially ultra context dependent juniper management. Because, for instance, I do a lot of work on a property that's just north of here, up on Hummel Road. And in the span of 10 acres, you'll walk through a place that's totally encroached of new growth juniper. You'll go to a big open area that historically never had any junipers in there, and you walk up onto a rock outcropping and there's an old growth grove of hundreds-year-old junipers. And so you can see high variability across a relatively small landscape. Old growth juniper didn't necessarily grow equally and equally spaced across our whole landscape, even in the Mazama complex. And so what this really means is just having a vision in your head, a very clear vision of what your goal is. What do you want the land to look like in 5, 10, 20, 50 years from now? What are the steps you need to take to make it look like that? And then going from there. And we have entire resources that are like decision tree models about Western juniper management. If you have this goal and your property looks like this and you have this soil type, this is what you should do. Those are readily available. It's called Field Guide for Western Juniper by Rick Miller from 2007. Would highly recommend that. So again, we just don't have like site indices and all the regular silvicultural models. And so it's all super context dependent when it comes to our juniper management. Now, what if you could have it all? So the fun thing about all of this is a lot of these goals with juniper removal are not mutually exclusive from one another. The same actions that you take to improve hazardous fuels reduction will likely also improve wildlife habitat, which will likely also improve your native grass population. And it just so happens that the best junipers that make products are encroaching junipers. And so, given, being mindful and creative, you can have a more holistic set of goals as opposed to just one. But I think that's kind of the fun of not having these silvicultural models is we have that freedom to be mindful and creative. So this is a tree in my front yard that my landlord made, and you can kind of see in the back there that she has a bonsai garden that she's curated. And so she pruned this juniper to have a bonsai shape in it. So have fun. And with that, coming soon, like I said, all resources on Western Juniper are either biased in one way or the other or locked away in lots of text and data. I'm changing that. I've got a people's guide to Western Juniper, hoping it's going to be about 20 pages of everything you need to know about juniper. You move to a property with juniper, you have no experience in natural resource management. What do you need to know to live among these trees? I'm creating that resource. I've got drafts written. I'm just going through the peer review process right now, but I'm hoping that next year I'll have this out and readily available for the community. And with that, that's what I got for you. Thank you.
I have a question. Could you talk a little bit about juniper as fuel and how the landscape with and without juniper, how it would affect like rate of spread of wind-driven fire and intensity?
Yeah. So before getting into the how do I want to do this? So when a juniper is able to catch on fire, it's pretty volatile. The berries on junipers, given the right wind conditions, they can create spot fires a half a mile away. They kind of like bombs from the trees. That being said, so if there's already a canopy fire and there was already ladder fuels that made it into a canopy fire and wind driven, then yes, it's going to be just like any other of our forest types that are too thick. And so fire will spread through there. It's volatile, resinous, and so it's going to be hot. It's going to burn a lot. That being said, I would say if we're talking about priorities on a property, if we go to a property and we say, okay, we want to reduce the spread of fire and the hazard of fire here, I would argue focusing on your grass population is going to be more impactful and helpful than your junipers, because when junipers do catch on fire, they're really volatile, but you might notice that underneath junipers, they typically don't have anything growing underneath them. And so that's why we don't use prescribed fire anymore as a culling method for those phase 2, phase 3 juniper stands, even in the spring, because they just don't burn. The fire just can't reach them because there's nothing touching them there. And so it really is the cheatgrass annual grass problem. I would also argue that in some places we have just as much of a shrub expansion issue as we do a juniper expansion issue. And so that's creating a whole bunch more ladder fuels. So I'd call it and that's not to say like, don't even touch your junipers, only worry about this. I'm just encouraging a more holistic view of, it's not just the junipers that are the bad guy. It's all of these components together that are creating a more volatile space. One piece of recommendation that I give folks when it comes to old growth juniper and hazardous fuels reduction, a lot of our coolest looking old growth junipers, they've got those low basal branches that go down onto the ground there. And folks, they don't want to limb those up. They're like, well, it's like the cool structure of it. It probably will make them less physically sound if you took them out. And so my recommendation for folks in those instances is treat that old growth juniper like you would any other high value infrastructure. Create defensible space around it. Did that answer your questions? Okay. Yes.
Why was it juniper's the only one expanded in here? Is that the only plant that was available to expand like it did?
So junipers were the trees that are there, and they're the trees that are able to grow in this landscape. But for instance, you go up into the Lake Billy Chinook area, we've got ponderosas that are encroaching in rangelands too. that were spread via water runoff from the Metolius down, and they're there, but fire historically would have culled those trees. So they're the trees that are there. And then speaking in general, this is our local example of a global problem. We are seeing grasslands being encroached by woodlands and trees all across the world. It's a big issue in the savannah in Africa right now. And so we've got more trees on the planet than we ever had before. And we're trying to maintain as much of those ever dwindling grasslands landscapes out here. So yeah. It's the junipers that are the bad guy here specifically, but it is a worldwide global phenomenon. Yes?
Your comment about we have as big of a shrub problem as juniper problem just sparked something. I live in the burn scar of the 96 Skeleton fire. I remember as a kid, we had just this magical juniper that I was convinced was several hundred years old. 30 years later, none of the trees have grown back, but it's just all bitter brush. And I hate bitter brush. I think it's ugly. It looks so dry. Seasons like this year just covered in caterpillar nests, and I just hate them. Is that a completely irrational emotion? Like I don't know what to think about.
No.
Bitter brush. I just hate them.
I think it's like anything in natural resources. I am an anti-absolutist. And so when it comes to our shrub population, it's not like I said, we have this shrub expansion issue in some places across our landscape. In some places, it looks totally fine. In other places, especially in areas where fire have come through, and those junipers haven't had a chance to establish back up again, the shrubs are going to take advantage, especially if there wasn't a native grass population there. The shrubs are what are there, they're going to take advantage. Advice that I give people in those instances, if you want to take down shrubs in a structure that sort of mimics heterogeneity and complexity, get yourself a mechanical beaver masticator, have a beer in your hand, and do doodles across your landscape. And essentially you're creating different patchy, gappy, clumpy areas across your shrub landscape there. To answer your question, you're not irrational. It's a valid feeling. Yes.
Is the juniper considered a tree? I know USDA said it wasn't because it's not, at one point, they said it's not a tree because it wasn't a marketable shrub.
Okay.
No, I'm asking you. I mean, because so many people around here say it's just a weed. So
they're a tree, although there is a shrub form out east of here, and it's native. It's just encroaching and it's opportunistic. It's taking advantage of the situations that we and our predecessors put before them.
On that note, it is an Oregon statute. We usually define forest land as having a marketable species. Juniper is explicitly excluded from that because it's managed as rangeland.
That's probably where the confusion is.
Yep.
Exactly.
There's also shrub like juniper strains too, like tam juniper.
Yeah, the ornamental sorts and whatnot. And then we also have our common juniper that's up in the mountains there that grows more mat-like. Fun fact, it only takes 2 juniper berries to make a bottle of gin. And you can make them out of Western juniper berries if you want.
I care for juniper because of juniper berries.
Anything else? Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if it's really a question, but maybe you can confirm. My kind of takeaway from this, because I've heard a lot of juniper conversation over the years, and you hear people just say, "Oh, we've got to eliminate juniper." People need to get informed. I'm glad that you're coming out with some information that's people friendly, and then have clear management objectives. Does that sound right?
Hell yeah. Adam?
One more question, going back to the fuels aspect.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned treating old growth juniper like it's a high valued resource, creating defensible space around it. If it's not old growth, would you recommend limbing them up?
Yes.
Okay.
If hazardous fuels reduction is the name of your game, limb and thin. That's what you're going to want to do. And especially looking at that shrub population to minimize ladder fuels.
Jenna, some people have said that the junipers impact the aquifer.
I don't think their roots go down that deep.
Okay. Well, but taking the water that might go down. That's been one of their reasons for taking out the junipers.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I know that we're talking about cutting junipers for downstream impact. We find that in areas with less than 16 inches annual precipitation, we don't see as much of a hydrologic impact because those now available resources are being utilized by the now growing grass population and shrub population that would have been utilizing. So it's more of like a transfer of who's utilizing those resources. So I'm sure that there's some level of impact and stopping water from infiltrating as deep as it otherwise could, but I wouldn't put it all on them. I'd say that if they weren't there, there would be other plants there taking the water.
Well, it's been said that we need to get rid of all junipers because they're taking the water.
Well, and that's why I have that slide about how old growth doesn't grow the same across the landscape, and how the people of Prineville, they'd be totally valid in saying that because they do have so much more juniper than they did historically. I hardly see any old growth up there again, except for rocky outcroppings and things like that. Whereas folks down here, that woodland structure is the norm, is the historic norm. And you're both correct. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Anything else? Anyone online?
I don't see any questions in the chat. Just for the sake of time, thank you so much for the presentation. And juniper is an ongoing conversation that we hear come up all the time, especially in the fuels realm, but also people come with questions broadly about juniper management. So thank you so much. Okay, next we have roundtable discussion, and I do have a hard stop at 9:30. I've got to make it to a meeting just across the street, so I will have to be wheels rolling at 9:30. So I do have a hard stop there, but if we want to go around this way and just pass it to the next if you don't have anything.
No updates.
Upper Deschutes River communities. We've been accomplishing quite a bit of work to help mitigate wildfire on private properties. Thank you very much. We've got some good funding, and that makes it possible to keep our programs operative.
Hello, everyone. A couple things real quick. Bend Fire is hiring for a fire inspector. So I'm going to put all that out there. There's my little ploy right there. That the application closes on the 31st of July. So we are looking to expand our division, which is great. I just returned on Friday from a week at the National Fire Academy teaching a brand new fire adapted communities course. This is a brand new course that is revamped, and the case study is the campfire. So it was kind of a pilot course. We got to look at, talk about the Paradise was relatively prepared. I mean, they had education, they had engineering, they had emergency alerts, they had all the things, right? But this still happened. And so we're analyzing worst case, scenario. and it was a really good course. So I say that because I'll be teaching again in December. There's going to be another class there. This is in Maryland. I say that for anybody that's interested. Tuition is free from the National Fire Academy. You will have to pay for, your plane ticket out there. But if anybody in other districts like planning or building or anything are interested, they can go to that course. And we had about 3 different planners and building officials in that course, and it was fabulous collaboration. So if you have any more questions on that, please let me know. I also, before that, got back from where was that one? Richburg, South Carolina, for IBHS. And I'm happy to talk about what that looked like in regards to wildfire home hardening research. We did light an ADU on fire, fully furnished ADU. And we looked at all the different aspects of the home that was the model home that was 10 to 20 feet, I can't remember exactly, away, and how it survived. So lots of research, all that to say that some really good things are happening. I know there's smoke in the air. This is the time that people get worried, but we've been preparing for this for a really long time. And one thing is you guys are the spark plugs that can let people know how to find what zone they're in for evacuations. Please, that is one of the biggest things right now. People are super scared that I don't know how to get notifications. Please be that spark plug to say, hey, sign up for Genesis Protect app, sign up for Deschutes alerts. They will get those notifications. I think that's our biggest challenge right now. So yeah, that, and please take care of yourselves, because all this work is exhausting. As you guys are doing all your Firewise things out there, it's exhausting, and please take care of yourselves too.
If I can really quick, just on top of that, there's a lot of language from the state, own your zone. There's also know your zone, and specifically for Deschutes County, be cautious around your zone. Memorizing which zone you are in might not always serve you. Please check the Deschutes County evacuation site frequently if if there is a threat of being evacuated, because those zones change depending on the disaster, and if it's a wildfire, that zone can change. So please sign up for Deschutes alerts and check those websites frequently, because your zone can change. That number
Thank you for saying that. I had that in my notes. So fire is dynamic, and it doesn't go to zone A and then zone B, and it can spot all over the place. And so the emergency management, can take that zone and cut it into different quadrants and rename it something and all of those things. So even though let's just say you're in zone, 457, that's where you're at right now, that zone could change. So if you are on the Genesis Protect app, or you are currently watching the Deschutes Emergency Management Dashboard, that is a live dashboard on your computer or on your phone where you can see the most up-to-date information. Again, I'll throw Watch Duty out there. Watch Duty is a fabulous app for information, but it is not real time. It is not an evacuation notice real time. It will give you information as it updates through a third party, but it is not the end all be all. You are going to need to sign up for that Genesis Protect and or watch the emergency dashboard. So thank you for reminding me to say that.
Yeah, in that same area, it's important to have some situational awareness of a larger area than your own zone. Example I ran into is I was on level 1 for a long time, a few years ago. So right across the road from me, they were a different zone. And I had neighbors asking me, "Oh, we're evacuating. Are you evacuating too?" And I was still level 1, and their evacuation level had gone up, but they were right across the road.
Yeah, and I know Ben is in a current wildfire situation meeting right now, and he's great at explaining this. So the zones, like the zone that you're next to could be a level 3 go now, where yours could be, one zone over could be just a level 1 get ready. And the reason that they tie to those zones is often they're by roads, and it's the easiest way for them to identify, okay, it's touching this zone, this entire zone is going to be level 3, versus trying to draw it to a parcel level. We've gotten questions about that in the past, but Ben does give a great presentation on how they make those decisions and those trigger points that kind of roll it into that, okay, this one's level 3, or this one's level 1, or this one's level 2. And we try to have him, you've probably seen him present here before on that, and we try to have him present that every spring to get ready for wildfire season, because that is a question that we get often is, why is it this way? Or how do you choose to make this zone this or this zone something different? But yes, to echo what you were saying, watch duty, I use watch duty, but it is great for some information. It is not live information, though. They are drawing from our local resources to then put that onto watch duty. So for evacuations, that's going to be your Deschutes County site.
Watch duty references Genesis.
Yeah. Yes.
Hey, everyone. Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District will be rolling out some new grant programs, hopefully this fall. 2 of them will be specifically related to forestry and fire. One is going to be for improving forest resiliency and fuels reduction on private lands, and the other will be for post-wildfire recovery. These still have to go through board approval, so details are being worked out, but we're hoping to get those launched in November. So stay tuned for that. Once we have details finalized, I'm hoping to make some rounds, do some presentations so that we can all be up to speed on eligibility qualifications, some ranking priorities, so that folks know if this is something that they might be interested in applying for. So stay tuned.
Anybody who lives in Bend, I'm a homeowner in the city of Bend. I put in a request for a wildfire risk assessment. Melissa got right back to me within the day. I had somebody come to our house yesterday, did a fantastic job looking at our property, telling us what the risks are, and telling us what we could do to mitigate it. And I can't tell you how comforting that was to my wife and me to just realize there's a hope that we might save our house in a wildfire, whether it's from the fire or the embers. So again, I want to thank Melissa and the program that the city of Bend has. If any of you live in Bend, I would recommend taking advantage of it and telling your neighbors about it, because it's really terrific.
Those are our volunteers. They're out there doing hundreds of these, and I haven't stepped out and done one in probably 2 weeks. They are trained, they are amazing, and they're doing good work. So thank you. I will let them know.
I think from the Red Cross standpoint, I'll build on that, because I think we're trying to build up a group of Red Cross volunteers who are qualified to the same standards to do those home fire assessments. So try to add to that group. Other news for the Red Cross, our volunteers are very busy right now. We have a lot of folks working locally on the fires. We also have a couple of folks who are in Saipan and Guam right now, because they're part of the same Red Cross division that Oregon is, and so they're assisting with some of the typhoon response in that area. So we're very busy, but locally we do currently have a shelter open at the Sisters High School. It's been open for the last couple of days in response to the elevated level 3 evacuations north of Sisters. Not sure if we're having any clients, but we're available if needed. And I think we also had a temporary evacuation point at least a couple of times in Redmond, where we had the flare-ups there locally in town. So we're our volunteers are working around the clock to provide that service where needed.
From the Defensible Space Action Team, we had our demonstration project on May 30th. It went extremely well. Jenna presented and just
not about Juniper.
She didn't. But we had about 50 people there, and they were all just enthralled with her presentation. But it went really well. And we also did a professional video on it, and you can access it if you look at the Newberry Regional Partnership website. Go to Defensible Space Action Team. It's a very good video that we did. It was done by the same fellow that did the video for Sisters Fire, and it's very good. So we're moving.
Y'all heard enough from me.
Just a couple of things in the chat. If you're able to, and you're joined in on this one, and we can also send this out after the meeting. Ariel passed along that they have the final draft of the Wildfire Preparedness Directory booklet, which is a great resource for folks that are doing these education opportunities or just interacting with your neighbors, because there are a lot of resources available, and often we get the question of who do I call for what? So this is a great directory booklet that has QR codes that people can just scan with their phone to say, you're looking for grant opportunities, go to these folks. If you're looking for an assessment, go here. If you're looking for a talk about Juniper, go here. And those are all listed out in there. And we can send that out after the meeting. In addition to that, Heather Miller put in the chat the new homeowner flyer that was put together by Leadership Bend as well as Discover Your Northwest. This is for short-term rentals, which we have a lot of here in Deschutes County. So this is a great resource that if you are a realtor, if you are a part of a rental company, or if you own a rental property, to have this information out, because we do have a lot of visitors and tourism here in Deschutes County. So it's a short guide on, the alert system, how to get evacuated, what to be ready with, talking about how to recreate here in Deschutes County responsibly during wildfire season. So that resource is available and we can send that out. Let's see, what else?
And we do have copies of the directory booklet at the extension office in Redmond. Folks are antsy and want one.
Great. And then the newsletter just went out for Project Wildfire, and a lot of these resources are linked in that newsletter. So please go take a look at that. And then I don't have any additional updates. We can bump online and just come off of mute and bump it to the next person if you don't have anything. Not have anything online. Great. I also just want to offer this as I've been working in fuels mitigation and working adjacent to so many folks that do work on wildland fires. I've been passed along information that has served me both professionally and just in my personal life of smoke management, how to look at tabular forecasts, and it's a lot of the same resources that those folks use. So if you ever have questions about, what is the tabular forecast for the day? When is the smoke going to lift up? Where is this coming from? Wind direction, et cetera. I'm happy to pass along those links. I check that daily when we're experiencing heavy smoke, because that's a question that we get a lot. I know I usually have an increase in calls when it looks like this outside. So if you ever want updates like that, please feel free to give me a call, and I'm happy to point you in the direction of those resources. I use that, like I said, I use it in my office, and I also look at that when I'm going backpacking on the weekend and I'm wondering what the smoke is going to be like. So please feel free to give me a call if you ever have any questions on that. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. She left on